Across Europe, governments are tightening borders. Anti-immigration rhetoric is dominating politics in countries like Italy and France. And right-wing parties are pushing hardline approaches, yet Spain is doing something radically different, and in 2026 it is accelerating that shift, with Prime Minister Pedro Sánchez boldly framing immigration as an engine of economic power rather than a threat, and launching what may be Europe's most ambitious migrant integration drive, changing the conversation from restriction to expansion and making Spain one of the most watched countries on this issue. In the last few weeks, Spain's government has moved to grant legal status and work authorization to possibly up to 1 million undocumented migrants, far more than the original estimate of roughly 500,000, according to a new report from Spain's National Center for Immigration and Borders, a development that has shocked observers across the continent and could reshape migration flows into Europe, with experts warning this may lead to new patterns of irregular migration and shifts in Mediterranean routes as people seek to reach Spain's borders and legal pathways, even from the UK through France and across the Pyrenees, as police have recently detected increased movement along several routes tied to the regularization announcement. The Spanish cabinet approved an extraordinary regularization process that will allow hundreds of thousands of migrants who lived in Spain before the end of 2025 and meet basic requirements such as a clean criminal record to apply for residency and work permits starting this spring, a measure that Migration Minister Elma Says described as strengthening a humane and economically driven model of integration rather than a punitive one, and which will open legal work access from the first day of approval and include eligibility for family members, while opponents warn it could strain public services and draw more arrivals. This dramatic move comes as Spain's economy continues to outperform much of the European Union, with net migration remaining strongly positive, and official data showing hundreds of thousands more people entering the country than leaving, highlighting the central role that foreign-born workers are playing in filling critical labor gaps and fueling growth at a time when other nations are scaling back immigration. Before we continue, your support truly matters. Subscribing helps us keep producing independent global analysis like this. Spain's strategy differs sharply from recent restrictive policies being adopted elsewhere, such as new EU rules to streamline deportations and tighten asylum processing, which have been endorsed by major center-right and far-right groups in the European Parliament, but have drawn criticism from human rights advocates who say they risk endangering vulnerable migrants through forced returns to unsafe conditions. This debate is no longer just about migration policy. It is about national survival and long-term stability. Spain is confronting a demographic crossroads that many advanced economies are quietly approaching. Without sustained population growth, the country faces mounting pension pressure, as fewer workers are forced to support a rapidly aging population, a shrinking labor force that could limit productivity and competitiveness, and the risk of long-term economic stagnation that erodes living standards over time. At the same time, choosing expansion through immigration carries its own challenges. Rapid population growth can intensify housing shortages, place visible strain on infrastructure, and create political friction if communities feel change is moving faster than institutions can manage. That is exactly why several European governments have moved in the opposite direction. In Hungary, Prime Minister Viktor Orbán has built his political identity around resisting large-scale immigration and defending national borders. In Italy, Prime Minister Giorgia Meloni has pushed for stricter maritime controls and tougher asylum rules, arguing that uncontrolled arrivals threaten stability. Against that backdrop, Spain's approach stands out sharply. Prime Minister Pedro Sánchez is effectively wagering that strong economic momentum will outweigh political resistance, that sustained job creation and rising wages will maintain public support, and that integrating migrants into the formal economy will reinforce social stability rather than weaken it. The assumption behind this strategy is that growth buys time, and time buys reform. But that entire calculation depends on one thing: performance. Spain's strategy works only as long as the economy keeps delivering. If economic expansion begins to slow, if job creation weakens, if unemployment starts rising again, or if housing affordability continues to deteriorate in major cities like Madrid and Barcelona, public patience could fade far faster than policymakers expect. Economic confidence can shield controversial reforms, but the moment that confidence cracks, political resistance can harden quickly. In that environment, critics such as the People's Party and Vox would likely find a far more receptive audience, arguing that rapid regularization and expanded migration channels have moved too far. Spain currently stands apart within Europe. While Madrid is building structured labor pipelines and expanding legal pathways, governments in countries such as Hungary under Viktor Orban and Italy under Giorgia Meloni continue to emphasize restriction, deterrence, and tighter border enforcement. Across much of the continent, migration is framed primarily as a security challenge. In Spain, it is being framed as an economic strategy and a historic social policy, one that just saw the government approve an extraordinary decree to grant legal status and work authorization to hundreds of thousands of undocumented migrants without needing a vote in parliament, a move described by officials as historic and grounded in economic and social inclusion. The deeper debate is no longer solely about whether immigration can support short-term growth. Increasingly, the data suggests that it can, especially in aging societies facing worker shortages and shrinking workforces. But the more difficult and far more consequential question is whether Spain can scale this model in a way that sustains economic momentum without triggering the kind of political backlash that has reshaped governments elsewhere in Europe and beyond. Can integration keep pace with arrivals? Can housing supply expand fast enough to prevent resentment? Can growth remain strong enough to preserve public support? And will the European Union's own institutions push back against national policies that don't align with bloc-wide migration frameworks? If the strategy succeeds, Spain could redefine how advanced economies approach demographic decline, offering a reference point not just for Europe, but also for policymakers in the United States, the United Kingdom, Canada, and Australia, all of which face similar aging pressures and labor market gaps. But if it fails, the consequences would extend well beyond economics. It could shift Spain's political balance, strengthen hardline voices, and reinforce the broader trend toward restrictions seen elsewhere. This is not a quiet policy adjustment. It is a high-stakes national experiment unfolding in real time. If it fails, the political consequences will be significant. And the experiment will not end quietly. If you want clear, fact-driven global analysis without political noise, subscribe now. We'll keep breaking down the stories shaping the world.